Now, look, I don't pretend to know a lot about the Virgin Australia Supercars, I've got to tell you, but a lot of people around here do. It's more my colleague Paul Murray's go, but I know a lot of my viewers love their motor racing. The Supercars are back this weekend, and it has been a hell of a job to get all the teams to Sydney for what's called the Truck Assist Sydney Super Sprint this weekend. Fox Sports' Née Crompton joins us. Neil, welcome to the program. Am I right in saying the competition resumed late last month after a 4-month layoff?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Alan. Pleasure to join you. Yes, it did. After the trials and tribulations, we were out of business for more than 10 weeks when we had to vacate the Australian Grand Prix back in March. We did get one event away very early in the year in Adelaide, and we had this incredible pause. And we finally got back to business just recently, and we're back in business again this weekend.
And what about crowds? Are crowds allowed?
Limited numbers for this weekend. Obviously, as you know, there's a lot of problems here in New South Wales, and so there will be some people in the grandstand, thankfully, because when we were out there a couple of weeks ago, it was a tremendous event. There was a lot of colour and glamour on the track, but when there was nobody in the grandstand and nobody around the grounds, it took all the atmosphere away, like a party with nobody attending.
A party which no one turns up. What about the competitors, though? Are they still the same number?
Yes, we've got 24 people that are regularly a part of the Virgin Australia Supercars Championship. They'll all be in action this weekend. We're running under lights on Saturday night. For the very first time, permanent lighting out at Sydney Motorsport Park. The New South Wales government's been very kind to us and invested in that in the recent past together with the Australian Racing Drivers Club. So we're going to see that spectacle. It'll be pretty spectacular. And then on Sunday, we've got another couple of sprint races as well. So 3 races in total, constituting the 4th event of the championship season.
What happens then on Sunday? Because I know that the teams are based in Victoria and Sydney and Queensland. So I suppose once this weekend's round is over, what do they do? Rush to Queensland to be able to cross the border?
It's an interesting question right at the moment, isn't it? So they had to jump out of Victoria, those that were based in Victoria, just recently, in order to be able to settle down here out at Sydney Motorsport Park. As soon as this event is done, they jump out of New South Wales and they'll head to Queensland, because the next event on the tour will be in Darwin. The Northern Territory government and the Chief Minister just announced yesterday, in fact, that they'll need to spend 14 days out of New South Wales and Sydney before they're permitted into the Northern Territory. So everybody's got to jump across the border north of here before we can continue the circus.
And what about the Kiwi Scott McLaughlin? I mean, he looks strong, or at least my friends tell me he's strong. Can anyone beat him?
He had a couple of wins when we were out there 2 weeks ago. He's twice the champion in the last several years. He's very strong at the moment. He's pinning his hopes on a career jump next year and beyond into the US, where he hopes to be able to drive Indy cars. He's 27, he's a Kiwi, he's fast. Look, we had a great competition when we were out there last time, so I'm always a bit... I mean, if I was a great fortune teller, I would have won Lotto by now and you wouldn't have to talk to me, Alan. But he's a very, very quick guy. He's a likeable kid and he's fast.
Fantastic. Good to talk to you, Neil. Thank you for that. That's Née Crompton from Fox Sports. It all begins with practice Saturday morning and then a full weekend of racing. So good luck to everyone. I know motor racing fans love Née Crompton's passion for the sport, and we'll keep in touch. Née Crompton. The Virgin Australia Supercars Truck Assist Sydney Super Sprint begins Saturday morning. You can catch all the action, by the way, on Fox Sports, channel 506, all you Revhead. Now, this is a bit special and a bit personal. Today's the 16th of July, the birth date of 2 remarkable Australians. One is Stan McCabe, as you heard me say earlier. He used to have a sports shop in Sydney. Many thought he was a greater batsman than Bradman. I'll come back to him in a moment. But when he made 232 runs in 230 minutes in 1938, Bradman reportedly said to his teammates when it was all happening, "Come and look at this. You'll never see the like of this again." Stan McCabe. The other is the phenomenal Margaret Court, Margaret Smith. You can see some footage of her here at Wimbledon playing Billie Jean King to win the title in 1970. I wanted to talk to Margaret tonight, but she told me it was a birthday and she's going out to dinner. We're going to talk to her next week because Wimbledon would have been on last week. Her record is astonishing. Margaret's the only tennis player in history to win a multiple Grand Slam twice. That means in all 3 disciplines, twice she won the Australian, French, Wimbledon American, women's singles, women's doubles and mixed doubles. Stan McCabe was born on this day in 1920 in Grenfell. He was the third of 4 boys. His father was a barber. Now, Grenfell is 370 kilometres west of Sydney, close to Forbes. It was also the birthplace of Henry Lawson. Its population today is only 2,500. Hang in there. It was nothing like that back then. But the other great Australian sportsperson born in Grenfell is Jan O'Neill, born Jan Lehane. She's the first leading female player ever to have a double-handed backhand. Basically, as a teenager and a junior, I'm talking when she was 14 and 15, she was unbeatable. The grown-ups couldn't beat her. She was so unbeatable that in 1960, the LTAA, the Lawn Tennis Association of Australia, brought out the great Brazilian and Wimbledon champion Maria Esther Bueno and the 17-year-old English girl who'd made the semi-finals at Wimbledon, Christine Truman, to test the unbeatable Lehane. I was playing at the time as well. Jan and I were mates. We were juniors, but we were happy to win. Jan won all the time. Milton, Brisbane, 40-degree temperatures. She absolutely flogged the Wimbledon champion, Maria Bueno, in the Queensland final. But the critics said, it was too hot for Bueno and Truman. Wait till we get to New South Wales. Well, Jan had won the New South Wales title the previous year, 1959, at 17. In 1960, she demolished Bueno again, the Wimbledon champion, in the semi-final at White City, and defended the title. Actually, she beat Margaret Court, in the final in straight sets. Months later, the Australian Championships were held in Brisbane. Jan didn't enter the junior girls singles. She'd beaten everybody over and over again. It was won by the great Leslie Turner, who subsequently won 2 French championships. Leslie beat Margaret in the final. Bueno and Truman were easily dispatched by the Australian girls, and the Australian Women's Singles Championship in 1960 was to be a showdown between the unbeatable Lehane and the vastly improved and threatening Margaret Smith. Now, I remember the night before the final. We were all mates. None of us had anything. And I think Jan and I sat on the floor of a flat in Stones Corner. I know we were drinking Fanta, and I think Betty Pratt, now Betty Vivers, gave us a badly cooked boiled egg. This is the night before the final. Jan and I talked about what was tomorrow's final, and Margaret was too good. She beat Jan in straight sets, and Margaret began this extraordinary record of 11 Australian Women's Singles Championships. So I've dragged Jan out tonight. She's as big as a wine glass, very, very modest, and she's nervously in our Sydney studio. Good evening to you. You're looking sensational.
Good evening, Alan.
Now, listen, is this harder than playing Margaret?
No, not quite. I spent a long time, many years playing Margaret after I won all those times, but then I lost 4 Australian Open finals to Margaret.
Yes. She was amazing, though, wasn't she? Do you remember that night at Stones Corner? It was the night before the final, and I won't tell them. Jan said to me, Jonesy, she said, I'm not sure I can beat this girl. I mean, Margaret had emerged, hadn't she? She was powerful and strong, and you were a magnificent player. They pinned you to the baseline, but at the end of the day, you came second, eh?
Yeah, I did. Margaret was too good for me on that day. Probably, in a lot of ways, I had never lost an Australian, any junior title. And I guess sometimes when I think about it, probably the pressure just got a little bit too much. That was the one that got away from me.
Yeah, I know. Just tell us about the two-handed backhand, because no one had ever heard of two-handed backhands. You were a right-hander, and Jan had this massive two-handed backhand. Where did that come from?
The two-handed backhand came from, I was a little girl out in the country, and I had a big heavy racket that I used to hit on a wall with a wooden racket, and I put 2 hands on the racket. And I was basically a little bit left-handed, a lot left-handed really, but that's where the double-hand backhand started.
Amazing. Listen, what's in the water there at Grenfell? You and Henry Lawson and Stan McCabe, tiny little place, and your mum and dad, you know, we all lived that way, didn't we, in the bush? You were an authentic bushie. Who was Margaret the best player you ever played?
Maria Bueno was not too bad.
Oh, God.
Yeah, well, she won Wimbledon, and she was a beautiful serve volleyer, and, you know, they were Margaret, but Margaret was very good.
But I've got
talking of Grenfell, that's a special, very special little town, and it's not a bad effort for Stan McCabe and Henry Lawson to come from one little town.
Hang on, and Jan Lehane. I've got to tell our viewers, Jan was really one of those people unlucky with injury. And indeed, which Wimbledon was it when you actually thought, I think I can win this, and then was your ankle or your knee? You've had problems with your ankle and your knee, and bad luck struck again, didn't it?
The first time when I went, I have to tell you that Tennis Australia were not sending any women overseas. And so after I'd done so well in Australia, Grenfell and the Wheaton Shire decided that they wanted to send me with a chaperone overseas for 6 months. So it all happened from Grenfell, and then after I went on 6 months overseas, I played Wimbledon, and before Wimbledon started, I went over on my ankle badly and finished up in plaster. So it was a little story of a lot of injuries, my career, I guess.
Yeah.
But
I often think about you, Jan. Jan and I have been mates for 1,000 years, and I often think, I wonder, I mean, you're so immodest, she won't boast, but I wanted to just boast a bit here now. What if these tournaments that you played then weren't on grass? I mean, grass wasn't your favourite surface. Here now we've got these beautiful hard courts, and that was where you were the queen of the shop. How would you have played on these surfaces today?
I think I would have been... Actually, I liked grass because, don't forget, 3 out of the 4 Grand Slams were on grass in that time of playing Margaret. And when I lost to Margaret 4 times in the final, it was all on grass.
Yes, right.
So, but I think I would probably like to have played on hard court rather than clay.
Yes. And what did you think, what did your parents think when their daughter walked onto Wimbledon? I mean, who would have imagined from Grenfell you'd then translate to Wimbledon? It must have been a special feeling.
My mum and dad were wonderful. And they gave me every opportunity that they could give me to play tennis. And my dad taught me all that I knew, really, at the very beginning. He'd had an accident and lost his hand, so he played tennis left-handed and won tournaments left-handed and then won tournaments right-handed. So I had a bit of a hard act to follow, didn't I?
You did. I remember the day we went out for the Henry Lawson Festival, you and I don't know what we did. We opened the damn thing or something way out there in Grenfell. Hey, listen, lovely to have you. It wasn't so painful, wasn't so painful.
No.
I know you were very nervous. She's a beautiful, beautiful, modest an achieving Australian, this lady, Jan Lehane. Jan O'Neill, married to, well, wonderful man, a wonderful man, but Jan, nonetheless, is known to the tennis family as Jan Lehane. We remember all those times, Jan. You're indelibly implanted in the history of Australian tennis. Don't you ever forget that. And lovely to talk to you. We'll catch up soon.
Thank you for having me, Alan.
OK, we'll catch up soon. And that was a time, wasn't it? I mean, Jan Lehane and it was amazing. Margaret Smith, Leslie Turner. Leslie Turner won 2 French championships. And then people like Robin Evan and Madonna Shack. They were outstanding Australian women who had not dominated really world tennis, but certainly did under the guise of those remarkable women. There she is.